Sure. Hey everyone, thanks for joining, and I'm glad to be here. I'll start with sharing my screen. I think my introduction's covered there. Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, all good.
All right. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. So my talk is on writing your CICD once and running it anywhere with Dagger. So I'll cover what Dagger is and how you can achieve this over the course of the talk. All right. So a little bit about me before we begin. So I'm a DevOps engineer at Deloitte, a company called HashedIn by Deloitte. And I contribute to a lot of cloud native open source projects, including Kubernetes and a few other cloud native projects. I'm also the co-organizer of the Kong Bengaluru meetup group. I organize a lot of local meetups for Kong. And I'm a technical writer. I write blogs on my personal blog and also for a company called Stickator as a freelance gig. And I have a few cloud certifications. Right. So this is the agenda that I want to cover today. So I'll cover some of the challenges with CI/CD. So this is not a general set of challenges. So this is going to be with respect to what Dagger is looking to solve. And I introduce Dagger, some of the requirements that you need to run it, and cover some of the important concepts in Dagger, and familiarize yourself with Dagger, and also the Dagger workflow about how you would go about executing a Dagger pipeline or a Dagger program. And we look at an hello world example of running just hello world in Dagger, and finally look at a real world example of running Dagger on GitHub Actions. All right. So some of the challenges with CI/CD, right? So let's start with that. So the main challenge that I've noticed is with local development of CI/CD pipelines. So no matter what no matter what CI/CD tool you use, so you'll always have to check in your code to the Git repository or wherever the pipeline is running, and then run the pipeline over there. Although there are some CI/CD pipelines that you can run locally, like Drone, because it's heavily dependent on Docker, and since you have Docker on your local machine, you can run Drone locally. But then there are a lot of CI/CD tools that you will require you to check in your code to Git and then run your CI/CD pipelines in the uh, in the cloud. But then I'm assuming a whole lot of you all are familiar with CI/CD. So before I begin with challenges with CI/CD, so I'm just going to briefly touch upon CI/CD. So it's a part where it stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment, or I think there's another one for CD. But then so it essentially stands for as soon as you check in or complete finishing writing your code, so there is an automated process or a pipeline that is usually triggered, and it runs a few tests and builds your application and deploys it to production. So this is the most simplest way of using a CI/CD pipeline. Right. So that is what CI/CD is. And another challenge with CI/CD is that there are CI lock-ins, the vendor lock-ins. Suppose you're using GitHub Actions. If you want to move to GitLab CI or from GitLab CI to GitHub Actions, this is a very common use case. I've seen that happen in my organization as well. Because we kind of got acquired and then tools change, and also there are always people looking to change tools. So CI lock-in is one of the challenges, and a lot of CI/CD pipelines are written in YAML, and a lot of people do not like YAML because it gets complicated really quick, and it's not really pleasant to look at, and you need to follow the indentation and all of that. Uh, so these are some of the challenges with CI/CD. So here's how Dagger looks to solve that. So Dagger is an open source tool. It is a portable CI/CD dev kit. So it is not exactly a CI/CD tool. It is a dev kit. So this is where you write CI/CD pipelines with Dagger. So it is a development kit. So it helps you to develop CI/CD pipelines, not actually run them. So you'll still require an CI tool like CI/CD tool like GitHub Actions or GitLab CI Jenkins, any tool that you're currently using. You'll still require that to run the CI/CD pipeline. This is just the development kit that allows you to solve some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, and it runs on any Docker compatible runtime. You don't necessarily need Docker. I'll get into that as well. All right. So before we begin, some of the important concepts in Dagger, right? So the main important concept is plan and actions. There are two most important concepts of plan and actions. So plan is the part of your Dagger script. So I get to how a Dagger script or a Dagger program looks like. But then that is plan is where you would interact with the client file system or read or set environment variables and declare actions. So what are actions? I think actions are something that if you're using GitHub Actions, I think that is very obvious. It is the same thing. So these are the tasks that are performed during CI/CD. Let's suppose you want to build a Docker container. So that is one task. So that is an action. You can have an action for that. And you want to maybe run tests or unit tests in your CI/CD pipeline or security tests. Each of those are tasks. And in Dagger, it is called action. And there are core actions and composite actions. So core actions are the ones that the Dagger team has created for certain common activities. For example, Docker build. So that is a very common activity that is done in CI/CD pipelines, right? So that is a core action, and there are a few other core actions as well, very commonly used actions. And there are composite actions where you can combine one or more core actions to create your own composite actions. And once again, Dagger, the team at Dagger has created a set of composite actions that are commonly used, and it is present in, and it is called the Dagger universe, right? So this is basically a marketplace where you can find common actions and use them in your pipeline. And Dagger also has a really good way of handling secrets, that is the sensitive data. So you can read secrets in Dagger without actually exposing them in the logs or any shape or form. So that is a really good way of handling secrets. And all of this is written in Qlang. So it is not written in YAML or any other usually used configuration tool like maybe JSON. So Qlang is very similar to a programming language. There's a lot of it provides a lot of capabilities like a programming language. So you can do maybe string interpolation or strict typing. All of that is possible with Qlang, and it is a very powerful configuration language. So a lot of open source projects are using Qlang to define their configuration. And since CI/CD pipeline is a sort of configuration that we are defining to let the CI tool know that we want to run these steps, so Qlang is used here, and it is a superset of JSON, so it is kind of on top of JSON. All right, so some of the prerequisites that you require to run Dagger. These are not really prerequisites. Just added the slide to let you know how simple it is to get started with Dagger, right? All you need is the Dagger CLI that you can install with a single line. If you're if you're open to using curl bash, you can just install it with a single line, the Dagger CLI. And also you'll need Docker. To get started, the most simplest way is to use Docker, but then you can run it without Docker as well if you have build-kit. So Docker internally uses build-kit. So if you know a way to set up build-kit either on the host where CI/CD where your pipeline is running, or an external host, you can do both of that. But using Docker is the most simplest way uh, to run build-kit, because Docker internally uses build-kit. All right, so this is the Dagger workflow. I think this will be a little more clear once I run an actual example. Right. So the first step while running a Dagger pipeline or a program is you need to initialize your project. So if you're familiar with a language like Go, you would do Go mod init. So just initialize your project. Let the Dagger know that the current directory or the directory that you're using for your defining your pipelines is going to be a Dagger project. That is with the command Dagger project in it. And then the next step would be to get all the modules for the pipeline. So if you're using external modules or even just the Dagger modules, the core actions that I just mentioned earlier, or the actions from universe, Dagger universe, all of these needs to be fetched from the remote repository into the place where you're running your pipeline. So that is done through Dagger project update. So I'll show you where you can actually define the modules that you'll be using, right? It's actually the same file where the Dagger program is defined. And Dagger, finally, Dagger do, and then the name of the action that you want to perform is the way you run your CI/CD pipeline, right? Right, so this is the most simplest example for using Dagger. So this is the hello world example, where I go through each one of these, right? So this is the how this is how the Qlang program for a Dagger pipeline would look like, in the most simplest way, in the most simplest fashion. So you define the package, hello world. You can define it with any name. So this defines your package for the pipeline. So you can group multiple actions or multiple pipelines in a single package. This is a general programming concept where you group things in a package. And import is where you would define the modules that are used in your pipeline. So in this example, we're using dagger.io/dagger and dagger.io/dagger.core. If you notice, the syntax is very similar to Golang. So it is intended to be that way. Qlang is very similar to Go, even with the functioning as well. Once I run an example, you'll know that it is very similar to Golang. And finally, we're defining the Dagger plan. So I mentioned earlier, Dagger plan is the most important step of the pipeline. So here we're defining if you want to interact with the client system or read environment variables. All of that is done here. But in this simple example, we're just defining actions. So we're defining an action underscore Alpine. So underscore holds significance here while defining the action name. So it is not actually an action. It is just an action that it can be called by another action. So hello is the actual action that we are defining here. Let me just this is a pointer. Okay, right. So hello is the action that we're defining over here, and we're using the core module to execute certain commands that we want to do. That is, okay. Before I get into hello, I'll cover Alpine. So in Alpine, we're once again using a core action. We're calling the core action pull, and we're pulling the Alpine 3 image. So I'll not get into the syntax of Qlang, but this is what this particular line does. So it is using the core action pull to pull the Alpine image, and in the hello action, we are uh, the- asking for an input from the Alpine actions output. So all of these input and output, all of these are standard parameters. So to learn more about this, you'll need to actually look into the particular actions documentation. The Dagger documentation is pretty good, so you'll be able to know what input each, what parameters each action takes, and then we're providing certain arguments for the action, exec action. Uh, is just asking the exec action to run echo hello world. So once we run this, we'll be able to see echo hello world in our in the output. And the always true is just setting the cache to be always true. That is, it'll always rerun the pipeline each time. It will not use the cache. So that's just what this always true signifies. So let's just look at this in action, right? Okay. Bring up my terminal. So now I have the same program that I just explained. So I have the same exact program that I just went through in the slides. So I'll run this. So the first step was to actually initialize the project and then download the modules. But then let's look at how we can, what happens if we run it without doing all of that. So there's nothing in this directory except for that Q file. So what I'll do is dagger do, and then I don't know the action name. Let's suppose I don't know the action name. So I just so it suggests that we do a Dagger project init first. So I'll copy this and initialize the project first. So now if you look at the directory, current directory, so there's a q.mod directory that is created. So this is where all the modules that are necessary for the pipeline are stored. But if you look at it right now, there's a module.q which does not contain anything. Let's look at the package directory, which is also empty. So right now there are no packages that are downloaded. So we need to download that using Dagger project update. So copy that. So now it says it's installing all the packages and then install the two modules that we defined in our Dagger file or the Q file. So we had dagger.io/dagger, dagger.io/dagger slash core. So we so Dagger has downloaded those two, and we can look at that in the q.mod directory under the package pkg directory. So it has two directories where it has downloaded all the modules, right? Okay, now let's finally run the hello world example. So Dagger to let's suppose we do not know the name of the action that we're running, right? So it'll show you the list of all available actions for the file for the .q file in the current directory. So the available action is called hello. So let me run Dagger do hello. Okay. Right. So we do not see anything in the output right now. That is because the default behavior of Dagger is that it does not print the logs to the output. So we can do that using Dagger do log format plain. And now we'll be able to look at the logs. So underneath beneath the hood, so what Dagger is doing is it's just spinning up Docker containers and running them in that. So if we look at the Docker containers, so it's just using a build kit Docker container, and which is internally spinning up all the Docker containers to run these actions. So if we look at the output of the Dagger do command, so it has printed hello world, which was as expected, and there are other verbose information. And you can also set the log format, log type that you want, maybe debug if you're developing locally. So this is really helpful while developing CI/CD pipelines, right? But this is all locally. So I've run this in my laptop or in my system. So it's all locally, and there are ways that you can develop as well, but I won't get into that in the interest of time. Uh, but yeah, let's look at a real world example of running a Dagger program in the wild, right? Um, I do have an repository that just I do have an application that I've just integrated Dagger with. So it's on GitHub. So I'm using naturally I'm using GitHub Actions to run it. It is on the Dagger branch. So let's take a look at the Dagger file or the Dagger definition first. So once again, the same format of the QLang, where we define a package and import certain modules. Apart from the core modules, I'm also importing Bash and Docker from the Dagger universe that I mentioned earlier. And here we are also utilizing the, okay, let me zoom in a little. Sorry. Yeah, here we're also utilizing the client um, uh, where we're interacting with the client. So under the Dagger plan, we are interacting with the file system where we are reading all of the contents and storing and referencing it as Dagger FS. So this is all a little bit of QLang that I won't get into, but this is the general idea. We're looking at the current directory of the file system and reading it as Dagger.fs. And we're also setting certain environment variables that needs to be passed to the Dagger program. So we're defining that we require a Docker Hub username, Docker Hub password, and the build number as well. And we are defining actions. So this is one action that we've defined called build, which in turn has certain actions that we've defined. So this is an example of a composite action that I mentioned earlier, where you combine multiple actions to perform one bigger action. So under the build action, we are first checking out the code using the source module of the core repository, and we're checking out the current path, that is the current directory with the dot, and we're pulling the Docker image node LTS. So we're performing that action so that we can run. This is a node-based application, right? So we're pulling the node image so that we can perform certain CI/CD actions inside that node container that we pulled. And the next step is we're copying all of the contents from the all of the contents of the file system into the Docker container so that we can perform certain node actions like npm install in the next step. So we're using the bash action to run npm install. So I'll just briefly going over it in the interest of time, but I'll not go through the QLang specifics, right? And all of the parameters are all specific to the action that we're using. So we'll need to look up the Dagger docs to find out what action what parameters each action accepts, right? So we're running npm install or npm ci. Since we're running it in a ci, we can do that as well. And finally, we're running build test. That is, we're running npm run and npm build. But in my case, it does absolutely nothing. It's just outputs a single line saying that it is running running a build and running a test. But if you want to run certain npm commands, you can do that as well. Or as a matter of fact, for any such similar application, you can spin up you can use the bash run action, and then run a script to perform whatever you want, right? And finally, we're using the docker build action to build the docker container using the docker file. So by default, it looks for the file called docker file in the current directory. So hence there's no path parameter that I've specified. At the sources, this is where it defines the docker file context. So if you're familiar with building docker containers, this is you would specify the context for the docker container. We're doing that here. And this is actually a hack right now. So there's no way to chain actions in Dagger, right? So if you want certain actions to be performed after a certain action, there's no way to do that without a hack. So I'm just adding a label called hack, which depends on the build test success. Oh, another important concept that I forgot to cover is that the sequence of the actions is defined by the input or the reference to a previous action. So in this case, if you notice, we are referencing to the pull action. Here we've defined the action called pull, and we're referencing that in the copy action. So that's how Dagger knows that the pull action needs to be performed before we do the copy action. And in the next step, we are referencing the copy's output in the install step. So it will know that copy needs to be performed before install, and similarly, and so on. So it will know install needs to be performed before build test. So that's how the sequence is defined in Dagger. But in this case, it is the Docker file build is not the Docker build is not really dependent on any actions. So I had to introduce a hack to reference to the build test. So only if this build test succeeds, the Docker file will be built. And finally, using the Docker push action to push it to to my Docker Hub registry. And yeah, string interpolation is one of the beautiful features of using a language like QLang. So I'm referencing to the environment variable build number that I had earlier specified. So I'm using string interpolation to refer to that. Yeah, I'm using the my credentials that I passed as a environment variable to push it to Docker Hub. All right. Let's take a look at how. So that was the Dagger program, right? So how can this be implemented or integrated with an existing CI? So this is the GitHub action workflow that I've defined. So it's pretty straightforward. We're using the Dagger uh, GitHub action that the Dagger team has defined, and performing project update. The reason I'm not doing project init is because I've already done project init and checked in the q.mod file, tmt q.mod file directory to the repository. So all we're doing is project update and running the build build action. And we're also providing the environment variables necessary for the action for the Dagger program. That is the Docker Hub username and the password and the build number for the GitHub build number or the GitHub run number. So I've already run this. So it only runs on a push to the Dagger branch. So I've already run this earlier. So there's I mean, I will have to introduce an empty commit to show it running live, but I'll show the output of the already ran pipeline, right? So these are all the GitHub action specific steps that are performed. So it's just setting up a job and cloning the repository. So Dagger is the one that we've defined. So uh, these two are from the Dagger GitHub action. So it's just downloading and installing Dagger. But we mentioned project update. So it is once again installing the mod or downloading the modules that is necessary for the pipeline. And finally, running Docker do build, Dagger do build. So it is running all the actions that we defined earlier. So it provides a different color for the each action that is it is running. And if we scroll down, yeah, we're able to see the output of npm install that we did. And also I ran an npm run test or npm run build. So this was the output that I intended. So it went there. It was output there, and this was the output I intended for npm run test. So it is once again output here. And finally, we're building the Docker image, which is then pushed to Docker Hub. I can show my Docker Hub to show that it was pushed. But yeah, this is how the Dagger program is run and can be integrated with your existing CI. So there are a lot of integrations with very most popular CI systems. So they have the GitHub action for GitHub, and I think if you take a look at their docs, they have integrations for a lot of popular CIs. Right. Let me just search. Okay, this is for GitHub, and then they have for GitLab, Azure DevOps. I'm not able to find it right now, but then they have a really clean way of referencing to the different CI systems that you're using. All right. So in the interest of time, I'll move on with the presentation. I'll just quickly wrap up. Just cover some of the drawbacks that I've noticed while working with the project. So, right, it lacks some good visualization. So if you're using something like GitHub Actions or any CI, so each action is visually represented in a good way with those CI tools. But then when you use Dagger, all of it is run as a single step in the CI from the CI's perspective. So it lacks good visualization for each of the action that you're doing. And the chaining of actions is hacky, like I mentioned, and it is pretty early in its development. Right, it's I think it's almost a year that it was introduced, but the founders are pretty great. It's the same founders as Docker, Solomon Hikes and team. So they are the ones who created the project, and they're working on it. All right. To summarize, I think it looks to simplify the developer experience while running CI/CD, so that you can build it locally and run the same thing in the actual CI. So there's no configuration drift. So what runs locally is what is run on the your CI. Right. Like I mentioned, it's still in its early stages, but it is promising. So some of the resources that I've used in my talk and in my demos, a lot of it is on GitHub. So it's either on Dagger's GitHub or on my GitHub, for example, the example that I ran. And I think that brings to the end of my talk. Might have went over a couple of minutes, but yeah.
I
Thank
think
you
we're
for
good.
staying.
No, thanks, Avinash. Great presentation. I think thanks for clarifying, and good to see your demo finally. But
Yeah, it was like surprising for us also, panelists also, to see the demo. Yeah, thank you for that, Avinash. And it was amazing demo. Having some community member presenting this talk is really awesome to see. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
perfect. Do you want to take some questions that have come your way?
Sure. I do see a couple. Right. So someone, Prashant asks if Dagger is just a wrapper. Yeah, it is sort of a wrapper. So you would still need your CI to run Dagger programs in your CI, right? And will there be whether we'll be able to persist artifacts in Dagger? Yes, I believe there are actions for doing so, but then it'll depend a lot on the CI that you're using. So if you're using GitLab or something, so the integration between the artifacts where you want to store your artifacts and Dagger needs to be present. But I believe there are actions around that. But if not, I think they will be working on it because that is a pretty common use case. I believe it is though, but yeah. I think that is all the questions that I have.
Whether we will able to persist artifact in Dagger, Prashant is asking for this.
Yes, I just mentioned, right. So there, I think there are actions to do that, but it depends a lot on the CI. For example, if you're using GitLab, so the integration or the place where you store your artifacts, the integration between that and Dagger needs to be present. but there are integrations for GitHub packages, I believe. So you'll be able to persist artifacts from Dagger to GitHub packages, if I'm not wrong.
Thank you.